Okay, good morning, Isabel. Good morning, Danae. I hope everybody is well. This is the help session on chapter 3. And I'm glad that you're here this morning. Others are going to wish that they were here. So you have a leg up on your contemporaries. Okay, let's get some record keeping and information out of the way before we start. On Monday, I will be sending out the exam. It will be due 10/8. No, so that gives you 10 days. So the exam's mailed out on 9/29. It will be due on 10/8. And in order to complete the exam, you will need to listen to the lectures and labs and read the textbook assignments, which are chapters 1 through 3. So the questions will come from those. They will come from the labs and lectures that have been recorded, and most of those are on the YouTube channel. The questions will come from those sources, and so should your answers. You will get into trouble if you start looking at wiki type pages and trying to answer the questions through those. Those pages are written by amateurs for amateurs, and I don't want you to be an amateur. So don't answer by Googling these questions. That would be very unwise. So, exam mailed out probably the afternoon of 9/29, due no later than 10/8. Now, we have this help session that we're in right now. And then I'm going to try something new this week because we just have not been having good attendance at these things. So I'm going to have one at 6:30 p.m. on Friday. Some people have said that they would have better luck attending if it was in the evening. So we'll try this tomorrow at 6:30. I'm going to record this one. I'm probably not going to record that one. So this lab session will be up on YouTube later this afternoon. Pardon me. Now, next week, I'm going to add help sessions for those who are having difficulty with the quiz and need to talk about it with me or with others to get some ideas. So the first is going to be 9/30, September the 30th at 6:30 p.m. Then the next day, or the next day, October the 1st, 10 a.m. On the 5th, 10 a.m., October 5, 10 a.m. And then on the 6th, October 6, 7 p.m. So I'm trying these different times to see if I can't get more participation. And this simply is to help you in case you need some information or ideas about your exam or want to know if you're on the right track in your answers. Now, the next week, that would be the week that the exam is due. I need you to start reading chapters 5 and 6. That's for the week after the exam, or the week of the exam is due on the 8th. That week you would need to finish your exam and quickly start reading chapters 5 and 6. Do not read chapter 4 because we're going to go into chapter 4 in much greater detail than Dr. Poyman does, and we will do that the last part of the class, because I consider that the most important. As I told you in the last lecture, Dr. Poyman is a moderate objectivist, and there's nothing really wrong with that, except I think that there are better, more effective, more efficient answers to the question, what ought I to do, than presented in moderate objectivism. So we're going to delve into those, and also we're going to delve into natural law theory, which he kind of passes over without giving much note to it. All right, those are the sort of record-keeping things that we need to get out, and I'll be sending emails reminding you of these milestones and these opportunities. Are there any questions? If you have, please unmute yourself and ask. Okay. So here we go into the textbook. Open your textbook on your computer, and we're simply going to start out with the first page and go through our textbook together. He speaks of the golden rule: do unto others as you would have them do unto you. So make sure that you think through that. Understand his terminology here: moral objectivism, moderate objectivism, and of course, if you place your cursor on those, you will be taken to the definition of those. Make sure you know those. You were supposed to be working on that from the very beginning. The vocabulary and the rear part of the textbook, that's where you can find these all together. Think through moral absolutism, they're right under those. Then under Aquinas's objectivism and absolutism, don't pay much attention to that. This is simply wrong. He goes right under that into natural law theory and gives it a page and a half of discussion, and that natural law theory is probably the most influential ethical theory in the history of world thinking. So it deserves a little more than just a page and a half of coverage. So we're going to look into that in a whole session on natural law. Make sure that you listen to the lecture on chapter 3, because he puts a lot of emphasis on Thomas Aquinas's doctrine of double effect, or DDE. He considers that an absolutist theory, and he is absolutely wrong about that. You should listen to the lecture. They would be very wise to listen to the lecture, because I can assure you there will be a question about that on the quiz. You should also read that document that I sent out on Blackboard that was to be considered along with watching the video on the third lecture. I would like for you to read that whole document If you can't, you don't have that much time, then at least read the highlighted section. There should be a yellow highlighted section toward the bottom of that attached document. That document is from St. Thomas Aquinas Summa Theologia, the summation or the summary of theology, section 2.2, question 64, article 7. So I included that whole document. Now, in that document, nowhere will you hear St. Thomas Aquinas talking about the DDE or the doctrine of double effect. It's not in there. This has been remastered by later philosophers attributing this to St. Thomas, and there's nothing in this document where he discusses that. It's simply not there. In this section, he discusses self-defense and whether self-defense is allowable or not. In other words, can you take another life to save your own life? There's no doctrine of double effect there. That's the simple question, and that's the question that he answers simply. So I don't understand where Poemen gets all of this. Although reading the literature, you always come across people who are trying to manufacture ideas from other people. You might argue, and I think it's safe to argue, that he doesn't intend this, Thomas Aquinas doesn't, to be a fundamental principle of ethics. It's simply a strategy of reasoning. This is a logical process. That's the only principle you can get from this, is that we should logically think about these issues. I would go with that if somebody said that the doctrine of double effect was to logically think about the outcome of our actions, then I could certainly go with that, but not this full-blown, this is an absolutist principle. It's simply not there in the original document. It's not there in St. Thomas Aquinas. Now, I can understand how people manufacture this because it does have a certain intuitive appeal, but he doesn't intend it that way. It's not something like the Kantian categorical imperative that we'll talk about later, or the utilitarian or consequentialist principle of Bentham and Mill. It's not that type of moral principle. It's simply a process of reasoning. I hope that's clear. This whole discussion in St. Thomas Aquinas in section 2.2 of the Summa is not about ethics at all. It is a discussion of law and not moral theory. So I don't, if you come to Poemen's idea here, you simply miss what St. Thomas is up to in this section of the Summa. So I hope you don't fall for that. I think it's important to be fair to people here, and Poemen is being neither fair nor clever nor intellectually forthright. All right, let's go on turning through the problems with the doctrine of double effect, which we would assume are no problems, since the doctrine of the double effect is not doing or intended to do what Dr. Poemen says it's doing. But toward the end of that section entitled Problems with the Doctrine of Double Effect, I call your attention to the statement. This is 2 paragraphs before the end of that section. The paragraph beginning with, however, even if this non-religious account of evolution is inaccurate. He writes, nonetheless, the DDE may remind us of 2 important moral truths. Negative duties are typically more stringent than positive ones. In other words, don't do this is more imperative than do this. Ordinarily, it is less wrong to allow an evil than to do an evil. Otherwise, a maniac known to reliably execute his threats could get us to kill someone merely by threatening to kill 5 people unless we carried out our murder. Number 2, people have rights that must be respected, so we cannot simply decide what to do based on a crude utilitarian calculus. That's true. I don't think you derive that from, well, I guess you would. You could derive this from what St. Thomas says, because it's a process of logical reasoning, and the utilitarian calculus simply is not. So applying that concept of logical reasoning, then the utilitarian principle would be ruled out, but not because you're following a principle of St. Thomas Aquinas, but simply because you are logically thinking through the question. So it would not rule out a rule. As a matter of fact, this will be clearer to you later on, because when we talk about utilitarianism, there are 2 kinds of utilitarianism: act utilitarianism and rule utilitarianism. And I think it's simply this principle. Mill was a logician too, so he was a clear thinker, and he was led later on in his work to to do away with act utilitarianism and form rule utilitarianism. Again, that'll be clearer later on. So in following this logical analysis, this is what led Mill to rule out act utilitarianism and to replace it with rule utilitarianism. And he's simply doing that because he does what St. Thomas Aquinas recommends here. I hope that's clear. Put that kind of in the back of your mind, because that's going to occur again when we go into utilitarianism a couple of chapters forward. Okay, the next heading here in Poemen's textbook is moderate objectivism. Make sure that you know what moderate objectivism is. That's Dr. Poemen's position. Dr. Poemen is a moderate objectivist. So if you really want to understand where he's coming from, this is where he's coming from. So I might ask you on a quiz to compare moderate objectivism to this logical analysis that I've outlined for you and what St. Thomas Aquinas is doing. That's one possible question that might interest me enough to jot it down and ask you to think about it. So make sure that you know moderate objectivism, and within moderate objectivism, make sure you know the 10 principles here of core morality. Now this core morality, this central morality, I guess we might say, this fundamental morality, is the claim of moral moderate objectivism. It says that there are 10 principles that are incontrovertible, that all people everywhere abide by. That's the claim. So as long as you are faithful to this core morality, you are entitled, um, in some situations, to have ethical situationalism, which he discusses right before the conclusion. So think about these core moralities, whether they are common human nature or not. When we say our common human nature, which is a subject heading here toward the end of this chapter, then implicitly Poiman is arguing that these 10 statements here, these 10 factors, are part of our common human heritage. And as long as we are faithful to those principles, there's some wiggle room in moderate, right? Moderate's not cut and dried. There's some wiggle room. It's not this, not that, but there's something in the middle. That's a peculiar American way of looking at things, a kind of pragmatic. As a matter of fact, I think, one could argue that this is sort of invented by American philosophical system, which is pragmatism. I mean, all the way from the great philosopher and psychologist William James, all the way to Josiah Royce that I mentioned, I think I mentioned in the last lecture, forward to the American political system is sort of pragmatic, do what works. So this moderate objectivism fits into that pragmatic situation. Okay, that's it. That's all that I need to talk about today. As usual, you know that I've set up all of these different times to try to get people involved in the discussion, trying evening, morning, trying to maximize people's availability. But as always, you know that I'm here. If you need me, make sure that you email me and I'll set up an independent individual time for you on Zoom. Also, my friends, please make sure that you are signed in, attached to Blackboard and WebAdvisor. Make sure you're getting these emails, because your success in this course depends on you getting these assignments, getting these lab announcements, or the lecture announcements. You need to know when that sort of thing is happening, and you need to get on it. These are difficult times. We've all got other things that press upon us. And I've tried to categorize this as closely as I can, but some of this stuff you just have to do. It's different. I mean, if we were in a face-to-face, if we were allowed to do that, you would have to come to class. Well, you don't have to come to class, but you would be held responsible for what happens in the class, whether you came or not. And now you're held responsible for the information that I put out in these many and varied ways. I know it would be much better if you could just condense it down to twice a week. But anyway, you're responsible for the information. And I've tried to make it easy as I possibly could, and as convenient as I possibly could, but you've got to meet me at least halfway. Okay, any questions? Unmute yourself and ask away. All right, I'm glad that you're here. And as I said before, this is being recorded and will be up this afternoon as soon as the video processes from Zoom to YouTube, which, you know, is not always magic. Sometimes it's hard work. Okay. I hope everybody is well, and you know, if you need me, I'm an email away. So, blessings to you, and I hope that you're well and safe and sound, and I'll talk to you later.